Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And we'd like to thank Ken Burnham for coming in and talking about the event coming up. As I mentioned, we used to do that at a church that I attended some years ago, and we would do it just before Christmas. So, of course, we had worse weather there than you often get here in December. 842, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. And I do want to point out, looking for a high today, not really much warmer than 60. The weather, gosh, I don't know when this is finally going to come to an end. After yesterday was probably the nicest day we've had since Halloween. I was thinking about that. We do an event here where we do, the Trick or Treat Street every year. And that day, I think the high temperature was 73, and it was warm out. The next day, the temperature dropped about 30 degrees, and there was rain. And we've not really had a string of warm days since then. Now, I think we were up above 70 a few days. Yesterday, though, was the first time where I happened to think that, driving along and look down and see the temperature had clocked 80, where I thought, wow, this is going to be more permanent. But it's not going to be permanent right away. We're looking at a cool down. I had said yesterday by next Wednesday we might see some snow flurries. That may still be the case. None of this will stick on the ground. And the daytime high, which was only going to be in the 40s next Wednesday, they've adjusted that. The forecast I looked at said, well, maybe in the 50s. And one forecast, it said only 49 tomorrow, but a forecast I looked at this morning as I was settling into the chair before the show said tomorrow probably still in the 50s. So it won't be quite as bad as it looked. But by the end of next week, it looks like the breakout is finally here. And just a quick note, the weather is a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. I also wanted to mention coming up next Wednesday on the program between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, we'll be joined by one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls. We do it every Wednesday morning. We take some time. It's your opportunity to actually chat, if you'd like, with one of the medical pros, the doctor or one of the physician assistants while they're in the studio with us. Dr. Tripp's office is still looking for new patients. And often, if you're a patient of the office, they can see you on the very same morning or day if you call in the morning with a medical issue. And Tripp Family Medicine is located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. Big story that came down yesterday, and at first I thought, well, maybe somebody is getting a few facts wrong about this, because a friend of mine, she lives up north of Boise, but she's very active in the LDS church, and she posted to Facebook. She said that don't believe what you're reading about the church breaking from the Boy Scouts. And there was a photograph of her on Facebook along with her son in his Boy Scout uniform. But I came in this morning, and there's quite a bit more to this story. If you had not yet heard about this, this is sending shockwaves through the Boy Scouts of America. And according to the church, the social politics really had nothing to do with this. May be true, but I think that the fact that the Boy Scouts have been drifting away from a lot of the traditional values of the churches that sponsor troops, that this may have been inevitable, and it was just a matter of time before some large church decided, we're going to pull out of this. But it's not a complete withdrawal. This is the headline from the Salt Lake Tribune. Mormon Church takes steps away from Boy Scouts of America. And then there's a question, does total exodus loom? And the writer says it's not the end of Mormonism's longtime alliance with the Boy Scouts of America, but it could be a step in that direction. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints announced Thursday that come January, it is dropping Boy Scout of America programs known as Varsity and Venturing for Boys 14 to 18. The break will affect to some degree more than 130,000 Mormon boys in the United States and another 55,000 in Canada. So, we're getting up pretty close to 200,000 teenagers. The Utah-based faith will continue to use the Cub Scout and Boy Scout programs for boys ages 8 through 13, amounting to more than 280,000 LDS kids. So more than 250,000 in that sense. However, the story goes on to point out that number may actually change as well. The church has noted previously that it is looking to develop its own program to serve the faith's young people around the world, and this move and the accompanying statement reinforce that it is still aiming toward that end. And so the program for the younger kids, the Cub Scouts and the like, that likely could someday as well. They'll develop the new program for the teenagers, and then after that is in place, could well develop programs that will then trickle down and impact all of the kids from 8 years old and on. And to say that we didn't see this coming. Oh, come on. I think that there have been people who have been uncomfortable with the direction of the Boy Scouts now for a number of years. You know that the Scouts have been. It's not completely the fault of the people who run the Boy Scouts of America. The Scouts have been under assault from the courts, even though no one forces you to join it. You've got courts now that try to meddle in all sorts of private organizations. They've been doing it. I remember back in the 1980s, and I was a member of a local Rotary Club when the decision came down that women could join. And I had a friend who had sponsored me when I got involved, and I went into his store one day, and he looked at me and he says, your boss is going to be the first woman who wants to join. And he was not pleased about that because she bought the radio station that he used to own that I was working for. So even though it was a friendly sale, he didn't necessarily approve of the idea that she would be joining the club. The court at the time ruled that there was a benefit to being in organizations like Rotary and Kiwanis, and said that if you excluded women, then they didn't have the same opportunities to network in business that the men had, as if the women couldn't form their own organizations. And then you see today many of these very same organizations, they would welcome women because they can't necessarily find anybody to get involved. Americans don't join many of these organizations anymore, including the Boy Scouts, including younger Americans. We have so many different things in our lives that dominate what we do. I remember a friend of mine, she got involved in a Rotary Club back in Delaware, and it turned out that everyone was grateful that she was there because the man who was running the club told me one day, he said, she does most of the legwork for everybody. So in that case, they were welcoming of the fact that a lot of the women who get involved in these clubs can do this. But when it comes to the Boy Scouts, and over the last few years, you've had the changes coming from the top of scouting. Since Robert Gates really took over, he used to work in the Obama White House, of course. Since Robert Gates took over at National, we've had the ruling that, homosexual men can actually be Boy Scout leaders. Now, the argument there has been they're no more likely to abuse a child than a straight guy. And there's probably, I'm not going to argue against that. But I think that for a lot of people who believe in a biblically based outlook, they just don't think that we should have role models like that. But in this day and age, if you make that claim, the left shouts you down and calls you racist and bigot. I know a little bit about this in my hometown. There was a man, it was after I was out of scouting, and our old scout leader, Mr. Frazier, had retired from scouts almost altogether, and a fellow named Stillman took over for him. And I had grown up and moved away, and one day I was working in a newsroom, and the AP wires started clattering, and a story came across, and it said that Colin Stillman had been arrested and accused of molesting 185 scouts. And they got a conviction on one of those charges and sent him off to prison for a couple of years, and that was all he ended up getting in that situation, which is why parents are very nervous about any changes in the way that these organizations operate. They're not comfortable with that. And now that you can have young girls who think they may be boys join the Boy Scouts because we wouldn't want to offend them, the argument that they might need medical help is considered to be prejudicial or mean-spirited. So we just say, all right, well, cut your hair and put on a Boy Scout uniform and go ahead and do that. But I'm going to guess that a lot more churches, that the LDS, by making this decision, a lot of other churches that are sponsoring these troops have been looking around and saying, well, we'll see what everybody else does. When such a large organization makes this decision, you may well see some of the other denominations are going to follow suit now. And this could be the end of the Boy Scouts as we've historically known them. And they have been such a huge part of American culture. It is just a shame to see that this could happen and that it's going to be happening, and it will happen on a large scale. And for a lot of the young men who've been in Scouts and who have fond memories of scouting and the things that it taught them and the skills that it taught them, it's just another plank being torn away from their cultural memories. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There is an argument from the LDS Church, and I think it makes complete sense. The Boy Scouts are very America or Canada-centered, and the church does business around the world. I won't say business is probably the right term, but you get what I mean. You get my drift. The church is all around the world, and so therefore, if you're going to have a scouting organization, you want it to be more reflective of that worldwide mosaic. We've got a caller with us. The number is 736-0300, 736-0300, and you're up next. You're on Top Story.
Yeah, I remember my older brother was an Eagle Scout, and I was just a young boy, and not only was my mom and dad proud, and but I was thinking it was unbelievable what he had done. And he had injured himself, and he had to swim up there at Camp Bradley, northwest of Stanley, and across the lake. And I don't know. I'm sorry, I should know more, but it was, it had to, he was injured, and he went ahead and passed anyway. I don't remember exactly what all it was, but that added to the honor. And so you said to yourself, man, this is so neat. And he is a young man. And nowadays, you've got 100 different transgender identities or some crazy thing. And here we're trying to teach our children, right from wrong, that this is God created you the way that you were meant to be created. And you got young children who are so susceptible to things, and you don't want to overprotect them, but you say, man, some of this stuff is nothing but poison. And you say, where do you draw the line? Do you overprotect them and then kick them out one day, and then they don't?
Here's something to consider with all of this, is that liberals have been telling us for years we've got to get with their program as if nobody has any other alternative. And now people are flexing their muscles and saying we do have alternatives.
Well, I mean, right and wrong is still right and wrong, whether or not these sorry SOBs want to think that it's gray. But what it does is it takes away the innocence of our children. When you and I were young, I don't know about your age, and, we were just running around having fun. We didn't have to decide whether or not we were bisexual, transgender, or we were just boys and girls. And now it's such a mess. The damage to the psyche is, who the hell knows how bad it is. I'll hang up. See ya.
Hey, thank you much for the call. I can recall when we were kids, the only real differences we thought about between boys and girls is they had a different style bicycle. Although I think they should have had the bar and well, never mind. We don't want to go down that road. We have another caller with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, it's really sad what's happening to our culture. My son and grandson are both Eagle Scouts, and the scouting program has been a wonderful organization. But, the liberals just keep pushing ahead. Unfortunately, the rest of us sit back and let it happen. I attended a meeting recently, and I said, how many of you are, have contacted your senators? How many of you are, emailed or written a letter to the editor or anything like that? There wasn't one. And I said, we've got to be involved to hold these politicians, to hold the culture that we have, or we're losing it, because the other side is very active. And so anyway, it's just one of those things that happens. And if we don't keep their feet to the fire and take an active role, but everybody else says, oh, you go ahead and do that, and we're going to just keep on doing what we're doing, which means we're going to keep losing if we don't get involved. And then the Christians are sitting back saying, well, we do our thing within the four walls of the church, and that's what we're told to do, and, stay out of politics. And this is the result. And now the Boy Scouts organization basically destroyed because we haven't been involved to protect it.
Well said.
The culture.
Well said. I thank you for the call. Let's try line, line 3, I guess it's called. How would you know, right? I could be picking line 7. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yeah, I grew up in the LDS church, and I was very active in Scouts, and I loved it, loved every bit of it. I got my Eagle Scout when I was 13 years old, and I even went on and earned palms after that. And, I grew up. I became a scoutmaster, and I was extremely disappointed in the direction that the scouts started to go. It used to be that you had to earn your merit badges, you had to earn your rank advancement, and when I got there, it was bring your kids in, we'll sit them in a group meeting with 14 other kids, and by the end of the day, you'll have a merit badge. And that's not what it was supposed to be. And I think Lord Baden-Powell would be rolling over in his grave at what his organization has become.
He would have never, ever, men of his generation, that the whole notion that we're turning away from, the idea was in his era was we're building men, right? For a rugged life.
Right.
No more, I guess.
And it used to be, you know what, we're going to teach you to build a fire, and before you can pass this off, you build a fire. Well, now it's, just tell me how, and we'll call that good enough. And that's kind of the way our society's gone, and unfortunately, it's a horrible deal. The church's decision to move away from scouts, I think, like you said, was inevitable. But at that age, those kids are moving on anyway. They're in sports, they're in other activities, and they don't really want to do that anyway. And so there wasn't that much participation anyhow. It was kind of a natural move.
Yeah.
But at this point, like you say, it's all going to go away eventually, I would assume.
Well, thank you much for the telephone call. I've got a short break. We've got one more hour of the program still ahead. I do want to point out very quickly today, Todd Eccles is actually at a shooting competition. So we're going to postpone our Friday firearms talk for a week. But Todd is expected back next Friday morning. And we wish his children well today. They are firing off a lot of rounds. I'll just put it that way. I would be interested at this stage to see which church will be the next one that jumps in line behind the LDS and saying we're done with the Boy Scouts. I could see it happening. Well, we had a Presbyterian church in, I think it was Georgia a few weeks ago, just one church that backed out of the program and didn't do it abruptly, but said we'll give everyone a few months to make the adjustments. And that's a Presbyterian church. It's not Presbyterian USA, which is the more liberal of the denominations. It was Presbyterian Church in America, the PCA, which is a much more Bible-based church. But yet now that you've got such a large institution as the LDS Church doing this, my guess is you're going to see perhaps the PCA itself en masse, all of the churches saying we're done, and then you likely will see various Baptist denominations. And it'd be curious to see what some of the Roman Catholic churches do, because I'll give you a good example. St. Edward here in Twin Falls sponsors a troop. So this may just be the beginning of the dominoes falling in all of this. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, 7 minutes after 9 o'clock. We're at 61, and we're taking your calls, 736-0300. Caller, you're next. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. It's kind of sad, but I've seen it coming for a while. In fact, the churches also said that they might do something like this when they started threatening to force them to accept gay leaders and everything else. And the program is sad because the Olden model is being destroyed, just like our Constitution. And it teaches young men a lot of things. I mean, I use things I've learned in the Scouts every day, tying knots, getting out of situations, putting things together, the whole 9 yards. The other one I wanted to say was at the beginning of this, you said maybe even a straight guy could abuse the kids. I don't agree with that. If a person abuses children sexually, they're not straight. There's something wrong with them. And that's all there is to it.
Very true. Very true. They don't have an interest, perhaps, in any adults. Something happened to them along the lines of their life where they took that devious course.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's just like the Catholic Church. You have these priests that somehow molest boys. What is wrong with your mentality that you have to do that, and especially to a child? I mean, that's something physically wrong. And I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying it's more likely if you put some gay guy in that situation than you would another way. It's just my personal opinion.
I thank you for the call. I there was some research done way back in the middle of the 1990s, and I'll get to my next caller. Caller, be patient. I'll get to you in just a moment. A researcher at Cornell University, which is big old Ivy League school, he did some research and he discovered that, and he said that gay men were 14 times more likely to be people who actually are involved with people underage boys. And his research was sound, it was peer-reviewed, and you could find it online for about 15 years, but you can't find it online anymore. It's been scrubbed. How much do you want to bet somebody said to him the gay mafia came after him in order to get that removed? We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air 10 minutes after 9 o'clock. Go ahead. All right. Let's try the next caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on Top Story.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Thank you for taking my call. That last caller kind of hit what I was going to say about, the way things are going right now. The Boy Scouts is a great organization, always has been. Now, I'm personally Catholic. I'm not LDS, but I don't blame the Mormon Church at all. If there's a problem with one or two people doing this stuff or have done it, then do something to them. I don't understand where it comes all of a sudden they're going to start suing a church or suing an organization because something like this happened. It wasn't the organization that caused it. Like you just said, St. Edward has got a troop over there. We had one in Idaho Falls where I was raised. How can you blame the organization? It's the people. Now, as far as the gays and the Boy Scouts being forced to take in gays as the troop leaders, I think you are asking for trouble. I'm not homophobe or nothing like that, but you're putting somebody in a position that is probably more likely to do something like this than somebody that's straight. The fact that they're going to just shove them in there and make you take them, it ain't right. This is a private organization. The Boy Scouts are a private entity, I guess you'd call it. But yet the government decided after all these years they're going to make you start taking it, and I just think it's appalling that people will do something to the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts that has done nothing but help kids.
Sure. Well, I thank you as well for chiming in. The effort to social engineer this country into a liberal's dream, we may have finally hit the wall on it with this decision by the LDS Church. Bringing this up about having people it was a big story a couple of years ago when they said that they were going to have homosexual men could be scout leaders and lifted the ban. You know who this fellow George Takei is? I think that's how he pronounces the last name. You would know him as Mr. Sulu from the first Star Trek series. And he's got a big mouth. He's got something like millions of Twitter followers, and he's got a little bit of a comic presence, but he's a bit of a wise guy and a flaming liberal as well. He's also married to another man. And I was reading not long ago where he was explaining that he didn't know that he was that way, but he was at a summer camp. He was at a summer camp when he was molested by one of the camp counselors. It was a man. So he was about 13, 14 years old at the time when some grown man molested him. And of course now George Takei says, oh, but it was beautiful. Well, you were underage. The man committed a crime. Number two, you wonder when people say, well, I was born that way. Maybe you weren't born that way. Maybe during your formative years, something like that happens, and that's why you turn out this way. See, that was the concern of parents when all of this started. Now, the church isn't looking for any conflict here. The church is simply saying we feel that we can do a better job, and our scouting program will be more tailored to what the church believes and the church's worldwide mission. That gets them off the hook, I suppose. But deep down in, they had to be uncomfortable, even though the Boy Scouts of America said the individual church sponsors don't have to follow the rule. We want to make that clear. I didn't bring that up in the last half hour. But the individual churches that actually sponsor groups could make decisions on scout leaders. So according to the LDS Church, they didn't have to name homosexual men as leaders. But it's the idea, though, because you send your kids off to a jamboree, they have, I don't know, that they're rubbing elbows with all of these other people. That was the thing I remember about scouting. I mentioned that scoutmaster in my hometown. when I said that he had been accused of molesting 185 boys. Every year there was a beautiful little lake in my hometown. It sat nestled between some hills, and it would get cold. You're talking, some of the. It's not as the elevation above sea level isn't anywhere near as high as here, but you still got cold in the northern reaches of the Allegheny Mountains. And what would happen was that ice would freeze, and you could walk across the entire lake, and guys would play hockey out there. Kids would go ice skating. The scouts every year would do an ice camp out. That is, they would build a huge encampment out on the ice, and troops would come from all over an 8-county area. And these kids would be camping out there over the course of a long weekend in these tents, and it was part of teaching you how you had to rough it in life. The idea being that you're in a cold area, the wind is blowing, how do you stay warm? All of these things you're teaching these young people. Well, likely that scoutmaster was molesting those boys in those tents on those cold nights on that lake, on that frozen lake. As I say, I had moved away by then when this story got some national traction even at the time. And the sad thing is those scouts were coming from other towns and other counties, and so so you can be able to pick your own leaders. But there are times when your scouts, one of our callers mentioned his brother, being up north and being up by the Panhandle when he was at a scouting camp many, many years ago. So you could have a troop that's run by the church and you can pick the leaders, but then you send them off for a week in the summer. You don't know what they're going to be exposed to. And this notion, well, we're going to hurt people's feelings if we don't allow this. Well, my main responsibility as a parent is to my child and not to your feelings. That's another part of this that liberals don't get. See, they would like to communally raise your children so they can raise your children and indoctrinate them into their lifestyles and their beliefs. They don't like your resistance. They're trying to break that down. 916, Bill Colley, what do you think advertising over the last 30 years has been to sexualize young children? I can remember some of these child stars, and they would dress them up as if they were streetwalkers and put them up on billboards and in various magazine ads. And then they would deny that they were trying to raise anybody's prurient interest. Give me a break. This is all part of that liberal Alinskyite mindset that says if we break people down, especially when it comes to their morals, it's going to be easy to eventually control them because we'll just keep feeding them a diet of, when they finally grow up, we'll feed them a diet of pornography, some pills, some methamphetamine, and we'll be able to sheep herd them anywhere we want them to go. And God bless the LDS Church for taking a stand, even if it's not officially being stated. This is what's going on here. They've made a decision, and the decision is we're going to raise our young the way that we always have and the way that we believe they should be raised. We're coming up on a break here in just a minute. Bill Colley with you on Top Story today on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I hate to keep saying this. I've been telling people the last couple of months, well, the weather's getting nicer, and I'm relying on weather forecasts that just turn out to be, well, these are the same people who are promoting global warming. We've got a few cold nights ahead, down into the 30s in some spots again tonight, even though it's mid-May. And so we've been recommending, if you have issues with your furnace, which has done a yeoman's job over the course of the winter and spring, but it may be on its last legs. If you need some repairs done, you need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. The team at Ramsey's will make sure it's done right and done right the first time. Problem-free cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can telephone Ramsey Heating and Electric at 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. And if I could, since I'm mentioning some of the fine friends of this program, we've got about 30 seconds to go here before the break. Coming up now in less than a week, it's 6 days away. If you are having hearing difficulties, there's a seminar that you need to attend, and it's being sponsored by Dr. Christine Pickup in Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. They'd like to invite you to a public seminar and lunch at the Minnecasia Chamber of Commerce in Heyburn. I said Rupert. People in Heyburn are going to be really angry about that. Oh, well, there's only a handful of them. It's taking place at the Conference Center in Heyburn, May 18th at noon. Dr. Pickup is going to be sharing details on hearing health, brain health, and current technology advances. If you'd like to attend, though, you have to get in touch with her in advance. So you can RSVP at 208-312-0957. That's Mount Harrison Audiology, 312-0957.